Have you ever noticed how two people can look at the exact same thing and see something completely different? Well, the reason why often comes down to something we all have, but we rarely ever think about it. It's our worldview. You can think of it like the invisible architecture of our minds, or maybe the software that's always running in the background, shaping how we see absolutely everything. Today, we're going to take a look under the hood.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with this universal human quest for truth. Then we'll zoom out and see how those personal beliefs actually shape entire societies. We'll get into the big stuff, science, faith, and then see how these huge ideas affect our most personal relationships. And it's all going to lead to a really powerful tool for navigating the world around us. All right, let's start at square one, this fundamental human drive to figure out what's true. It's a journey that really connects every single one of us, a quest we're on whether we think of ourselves as religious or not. I mean, this has to be one of the oldest questions in the world, right? And how you answer it, well, that says everything about your deepest beliefs. Is truth something that's out there, objective, something we discover, or is it something we create, something personal and subjective? Your answer to this one question is a cornerstone for your entire worldview. It really sets the stage for everything else. Now, this is a really interesting point from our source material. The argument being made is that some of today's most committed atheists, because they are so relentless in their search for truth, find themselves unexpectedly drawn toward the Bible. It's not necessarily about conversion, but about recognizing that this idea of a single, objective truth has really deep roots in a biblical worldview. It's like their intellectual hunt for answers keeps leading them back to this one unexpected place. And that brings us right to our key concept, worldview. Think of it like the operating system running in the background of your mind. It's way more than just an opinion. It's the whole set of foundational beliefs that you use to answer these huge questions about life. It quietly shapes your values, your morals, your actions, often in ways you don't even consciously realize. So if that's the case, how in the world do we talk to someone whose worldview is completely different from ours? Well, here's a great way to think about it. Picture that person as an undiscovered island. You can't just crash onto their shores with your own arguments. That's never going to work. No, first you have to sail around the island. You have to map their coastline, understand their unique landscape of hopes, fears, and what they need. And only then, once you've done that, can you find a safe harbor, a point of connection where a real conversation can actually begin. Okay, now let's zoom out. We've talked about the individual, but these personal worldviews don't exist in a vacuum, right? They scale up. They merge together to shape entire societies. And when these massive cultural worldviews start to shift or collide, well, that can bring a whole society to a critical crossroads. So here's a really compelling comparison from the source material's point of view. On one hand, it suggests that as Western cultures move away from their historical biblical foundations, they're risking a kind of cultural suicide. But then on the other hand, you have a place like South Korea, which saw this massive adoption of Christianity, what's described as a revival of the heart. But the problem was, the underlying mind of the culture, the part shaped by centuries of traditions like Confucianism, stayed pretty much the same. And this phrase right here, it just hits the nail on the head. It's like you decide to completely renovate your house, but you leave all the old faulty wiring inside the walls. You can change the surface, you can change the emotional heart, but if the underlying structures, the cultural mind, don't change with it, the whole building is at risk. It's this huge difference between just a fleeting feeling and a real fundamental shift in how you think. So, the source material leaves us with this pretty sobering thought. When a society tears down the foundational worldview it was built on, it risks losing its cohesion, its very identity. It's presented as a really stark warning about what can happen when a culture forgets its philosophical and moral roots. All right, let's step into one of the most famous arenas of conflict out there, the supposed war between science and faith. We're going to take a fresh look at this, especially when it comes to the question of where we all came from, and see if maybe there's a different story to be told. Now, a really popular idea for bridging this gap is something called theistic evolution. This is the idea that God used the long process of evolution as his creative tool. And on the surface, that sounds like a perfect compromise, right? It seems to solve the whole problem. But the source material asks a really important question. Is this bridge actually stable? The perspective here is that this isn't really a scientific debate at all. It's a clash between two totally opposite worldviews. One starts with, in the beginning God, which implies a universe with purpose, design, and objective morality. The other starts with in the beginning nature, which suggests a universe born from random chance with no built-in meaning or moral law. The argument is that you can't reconcile them because their starting points are fundamentally incompatible. And here's where the story takes a really surprising turn. The source argues that modern science wasn't born to fight faith. It was actually born because of it. I mean, think about the pioneers, guys like Isaac Newton or Johannes Kepler. They believed that a rational, orderly God created a rational, orderly universe. And that belief is what gave them the confidence that the universe had laws they could actually discover. In a way, they saw science as their way of thinking God's thoughts after him. This ancient text was basically a mission statement for a lot of those early scientists. They saw the natural world as a kind of second book written by God, a book that could be studied to understand the mind of its author. So for them, science and faith weren't enemies. They were two sides of the same coin, both pointing to the same ultimate truth. So this brings up a really challenging question. Is the appeal of a purely naturalistic, godless universe really just about the data? Or is it possible that the idea of a universe without a final moral lawgiver is so attractive because it lets us be our own gods? It lets us make our own rules. Okay, so let's bring these huge, abstract ideas about worldviews right down to something deeply personal. We're going to explore the roots of sexism through this powerful story of two competing models for what it means to be a husband. So first, meet Baal. In the ancient world, this pagan god's name literally meant owner or master. And the argument goes that if your culture worships a god like this, it's inevitable that your relationships will start to look like ownership. It's a worldview that ultimately reduces people, especially women, to things, to property to be owned and controlled. Now, in complete contrast to that worldview, you have the biblical model of Ish. This Hebrew word for husband is all about partnership, not possession. It's about a covenant, a binding, sacred promise of love and faithfulness. It's a relationship built on shared dignity, and it's a model that presents God not as an owner, but as a loving, self-sacrificing partner. This table just lays out the difference so clearly, doesn't it? On the left, you've got a Baal culture. Women are seen as property, valued for their utility, and the natural result is sexism and oppression. But then look at the right. A culture of Ish, according to this perspective, sees women as equal partners who have inherent dignity. And that fosters relationships built on honor and faithfulness. Okay, so if this Ish worldview really values women as equals, what does that actually look like? The source material points us to this incredible portrait of the Proverbs 31 woman as the ultimate example. What's so amazing about this description is what she isn't praised for. She isn't celebrated for being quiet or passive or submissive. No, she's celebrated for her strength of character, her wisdom, her compassion, and her sharp business sense. Her value comes from her competence and her reverence for God. It just shatters so many stereotypes. And I mean, just look at this resume. She's an investor, an entrepreneur, an artist, a community leader. This is not a picture of a woman stuck in some purely domestic role. This is a portrait of an absolute powerhouse, a pillar of her family and her society. This, according to the source material, is the biblical ideal. Now, to make this whole contrast between the Baal worldview and the Assyrism worldview totally unforgettable, we're going to look at a story from the Bible that is as shocking as it is beautiful. It's a raw, powerful story meant to make this abstract idea hit home. The story kicks off with a command that would have been absolutely scandalous. God tells this prophet, a righteous man named Hosea, to go and marry an unfaithful woman. And why? To turn Hosea's own life into a living, breathing metaphor for God's relationship with a people who had abandoned him, a people who had left their Ish for a Baal. So Hosea's wife, Gomer, she breaks his heart over and over again. She keeps leaving him for other lovers. But God's command isn't to give up on her or to cast her aside. It's to pursue her, to love her, even when she's unfaithful. It's this painful, powerful picture of a love that just refuses to let go, a love defined by its relentless, covenant-keeping pursuit. Gomer's journey takes her so low that she ends up being sold into slavery. She literally becomes property. And the man who shows up to buy her back is Hosea, the very husband she betrayed. He pays the price, 15 shekels of silver, to redeem her, to set her free. It's this tangible symbol of a love that is willing to pay any price.
And this is the stunning climax of the whole story. It's a promise of a future where the entire relationship is transformed. God's people will no longer see him as a Baal, an owner you have to fear. They will call him my Ish, my loving, faithful husband. It's a fundamental shift from a worldview of slavery to a worldview of love, from being property to becoming a partner.
So, what do we do with all this? How do we apply these huge ideas to our own lives and navigate a world that's just full of competing worldviews? Let's get into our final section for a really practical tool that can help.
So, how do you spot a fake? I love this analogy from the world of finance. How do federal agents learn to identify counterfeit money? You'd think they'd spend all their time studying the different kinds of fakes, right? But they don't. They do something way more effective.
They just immerse themselves in the real thing. They study every single detail, every fiber, every watermark of an authentic dollar bill until they know it by heart. They know it so well that when a fake finally comes along, it just feels wrong. They can spot it in a second. And the exact same principle applies to worldviews. If you want to recognize what's false, you have to become an expert in what you believe to be true. And that brings us right back to where we started, the search for truth. In a world full of competing ideas and counterfeit worldviews, what's the real currency you're building your life on? What is the truth that you are studying so relentlessly, so intimately, that it gives you the confidence to navigate all the complexities of our world? That's a question only you can answer.